Where, like, what do you think one of the causes is for this growing right-wing extremism?
Well, it's been growing for a long time, and I saw somebody put in the chat that like, haven't we been drifting to the right for a long time? Yeah, we've been steadily drifting to the right for a few decades economically, and that's been also fueling some of the things that are happening socially as well. I think also that Canada, and I want to be kind of clear about my thesis. Yeah, the hate crimes are growing in Canada right now. But I actually think the whole political economic system is on a razor's edge right now. So I think Canada could be looking at basically a massive, it's facing the possibility of a massive makeover that would undo all of the positive things that you mentioned about what people think of as the Canadian legacy. We are really looking at like a systemic shift right now. It's not a few isolated incidents. This is a gathering storm, and it's not, a lot of it is mimicking the stuff that has come out since the Trump presidency. That's true. But this is the culmination of neoliberal failure in Canada. So it's not a quick trend, and it's not isolated to a small group of people. We're facing some systemic issues in Canada, and unless those get dealt with, this is just going to keep on building, and it could build to more decay and more extremism over time gradually. But we also could be looking at something like the kind of makeover that Margaret Thatcher gave to Great Britain, and we could be looking at an economic collapse. To be honest, we are not that different than the position the United States was around 2005, 2006 economically. So
Well, here, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, jump on in.
So a lot of these hate crimes that and I feel bad. I did forget about some of the things. There was a shooting at the mosque. There's a lot of anti-Muslim hate
Mhm.
going on in Canada right now. Is there a specific province where this is more prevalent, or is it kind of all over? It's Canada is about what, a quarter immigrant. Quarter of the population is immigrant.
Yeah,
And there seems to be a growing nationalism within
that's
Canada.
right.
Is
That's
this?
very unusual. That's
I was going
very
to say, is this a newer phenomenon?
Yeah, Canada historically was a country that was kind of thought of as a little bit ahead of other countries in terms of dwindling down nationalism. We were such a huge decentralized landmass with so many different cultures in different places that we didn't really have a chance to build nationalism the way other countries did. And so when other countries after the Second World War had disillusionment with the idea of nationalism, Canada was seen at that time as being ahead of the curve, and that was really celebrated in the 60s when we held the World Expo. And it was this idea of Canada, the kind of decentralized federation, rather than Canada, the kind of central nation state that was really celebrated. So what's very interesting, and this is where the Trump mimicry comes in, is that a lot of this nationalism that you're seeing pop up in Canada right now is a very fabricated aesthetic. And people are either really into it or they're looking at it like, what the fuck is this? But there's a lot more of the what the fuck is this going on right now.
Pascal, I know you have questions.
What is the root of the political economic downturn in Canada
Yeah.
that makes the economic crisis seem so dire? Are there something in the securities markets? Is it something in the housing market? Can you point to certain trends? Is it a demographic problem with demographic shifts moving downward that require a replenishment in population? What exactly are the political economic issues that make it seem like a society in crisis?
Yeah, you've named a lot of them. We certainly have the fact that we rely very much on, well, first off, the housing crisis. The housing crisis is very, very big in Canada, but that
Countrywide or mainly in British Columbia?
countrywide, absolutely countrywide, and not just in big cities, because what you're seeing are people leaving the big cities and flooding the markets in the smaller communities, but also within that, you have the phenomenon of real estate investment trusts in Canada. So
Mhm.
big money buying up big, big amounts of property and profiting off of this entire cascade effect that is happening right now. But maybe I can lay it out issue by issue. but maybe it would be better for me to look at kind of the structural formation of Canada, because it also has to do with the electoral system and what has changed in terms of our political parties and how that has cascaded into an economic effect that is spanning several decades. Like some of this goes back to austerity that began to pop up in the 80s and then more in the 90s. And it didn't look like austerity in other places because we still had the semblance of the old welfare state. But we were step by step going off the track of a kind of social democratic Scandinavian style country. We were kind of on the heels of that in the mid 20th century. And so we've really veered away from that in the last handful of decades. So none of this, a lot of it feels like a new phenomenon right now, but that's just things hitting their peak. This has been building for many decades. So would you like me to go through it issue by issue, or would you like me
Sure.
to? Okay, sure.
Let's start with financial.
Yeah, financial. Well, so what has happened is this. In the okay, I'll start with the financial side of things, but then maybe I should play into the politics a bit more.
Sure.
In the 1970s, so we were building a pretty substantial welfare state through the mid 20th century. In the 40s, we had Tommy Douglas form the first socialist government in North America with the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation in Saskatchewan. They created a number of crown corporations. That's what we call a nationalized enterprise, as well as gradually creating the first single-payer health insurance system. By 1970, that had gone national. So we were kind of clipping at the heels of a social democratic Scandinavian-style country at that time. From 1969 to 84, Pierre Trudeau, the father of the current prime minister, was the prime minister for almost the entire time. And he expanded the welfare state, but ran a deficit almost every year. And this confused a lot of people. There were debates over whether it was good that the welfare state was expanding or bad that it was coming with these deficits. And to confuse matters further, his first finance minister initially proposed that this be totally costed by taxes on the rich. The rich then formed a capital strike, or threatened a capital strike. So there was class warfare fought by the capitalists. That tax reform was put into, it was sent away. It sounds like I'm going back. It sounds like it's like very removed from what's happening now, but it sets up this cascade effect. Because what happens next is that finance minister disappears. Then a new finance minister comes in called John Turner, who went on to be prime minister for about 6 months. He was known as a business liberal. And a part of what happened next was the deficits were run in part to alleviate the taxes on the rich. So this confuses the whole spectrum. What you get is people not sure if this is left wing, right wing, or center. And their answer to that is going to depend on whether they liked it or not and who they're identifying as the bad guys. And that's true to this day. What happens after that is neoclassical economics comes in full swing, as everybody sort of knows. And that was Milton Friedman and then Reagan and Thatcher and all of that. And you get this cascade of governments after that, one after another, claiming that they're going to clean up the debt of the previous government and handle inflation. So in the 80s, the conservatives come in and they make that claim. They have some very, very big elections, form some of the biggest governments in all of Canadian history. But then they get the debts of the George H.W. Bush, it's the economy stupid recession, right? So they lose all credibility on that issue. And they also put through regressive tax systems on sales taxes. And they put through, they signed NAFTA. They were nowhere near as far to the right as Reagan and Thatcher, but they took a corner of that and were a part of this general kind of neoliberal influence in Canada that was another step away from the trajectory we were on in the mid 20th century. When they get into the 1990s, they get completely decimated. And they stay decimated until the early 2000s. But when they're replaced, it's not with a left-wing alternative. The Liberals come back, but this time the Liberals are saying they're going to clean up the debts of the Conservative Party. How do they do that? Cuts. And one of the things that they do especially is go after housing and basically stop any kind of cooperative housing in Canada, as well as other forms of social housing. They get back to balanced budgets, brag about it like crazy. You're familiar with this story around the world, the Clinton consensus, the end of history, Tony Blair in Great Britain, this sense of a not so right-wing version of neoliberalism being the grand success story, but then things get rocky in the early 2000s. Then comes in Harper, And how Harper comes about is very important as well, but I'll skip that for now. But it has relevance to our present moment. Harper gets in through the first past the post electoral system. He holds power for about a decade. We get more big deficits through the Great Recession, the financial crisis of 2008. But he's bragging that they're much lower than in other countries, and he's moving back towards a balanced budget faster than other countries. And he even tried to sort of cook the books to make it look like he had gotten there towards the end of his term. He was really about 6 billion shy, but and I hope I'm not going too fast for folks.
No.
Cool. So then finally comes in Justin Trudeau. And Trudeau says he's willing to deficit spend. But this time, by the time Justin Trudeau comes along and says he's willing to deficit spend, we're well into a neoliberal status quo. We're very far removed from the trajectory that we were in the mid-20th century. Now, meanwhile, all of the time that these governments were talking about, oh, we're going to get rid of debt, we're dealing with the debt, we're the party of fiscal responsibility, and having this competition for who's the party of fiscal responsibility and economic growth, what's actually happening? Is any of that debt actually being gotten rid of? No, of course not. Every dime of it was turned into household debt. It was all just put onto credit cards, student loans, car loans, and mortgages. So that whole time, what was happening was housing was gradually getting more expensive. School was getting a lot more expensive. The manufacturing jobs were declining. The unions were weakening. The tax system was becoming less progressive, more regressive, and the entire political spectrum across Canada was narrowing and shifting to the right, narrowing and shifting to the right, narrowing and shifting to the right. So that's how we get to where we are now. To give a snapshot of where we are economically, in 1980, household debt per $1 of disposable income for the average Canadian citizen was 66 cents. It is now $1.85 of household debt for every $1 of disposable income in the country. And total household debt in Canada is 107% of total GDP in the country. So what we have seen is Canada step by step. It's not just the current moment. This has been building for decades, but we have become a rentier economy. We're extremely unequal. We're accelerating the rate at which we are unequal at a record high level. So we're very capitalist in the sense of a division of workers and owners, but it's actually not industrial capitalism. Our investment in the means of production is actually pretty low. It's real estate and financialization. And the chances of that being fixed right now are very, and I should mention, this is like, I would like to get into what the politics are fighting within this context, but this is the context regardless of who's in power. So like the system right now, we still have a pretty high standard of living in Canada, but it has stagnated intergenerationally, it has declined. And the prospects moving forward are that either we will steadily decline from here, slowly, or there could be the kind of collapse that you saw in the United States in 2007, 2008. But that's true regardless of who is in power. This is a rentier capitalist state that has really taken over Canada in a major, major way. It is, and over 100 of our members of parliament, so our parliament is made up of 338 members, over a third of them are invested as landlords or in real estate investment trusts. So our politicians are profiting off of this housing crisis. That includes about 50% of the Conservative members of Parliament, about a third, or actually a little more than a third, of the Liberal members of Parliament. But even the NDP, they're much better. That's the New Democratic Party, historically our Social Democratic Party, now more vaguely of a progressive party. But they have about 16 to 20% of their members of Parliament invested in real estate investment trusts and in landlording. And the Green Party has 2 seats in the House of Commons. One of them is invested, so they're batting 50% as well. So nobody has their hands clean on this issue, which means that it is really hard for people to have any kind of faith that any of this could be dealt with, or to even see a path through the electoral system that this could be dealt with. So